to her is that this book, when I was reading it, was nothing like what I imagined it to be. Because what I noticed is that it's incredibly informative. And the first thing it told me, Ghazala, was how much I did not know. Sitting here with all of you, and this is a stellar audience, I can say that the introduction itself of Born a Muslim is something every Indian should read. It's just a great dispeller of many myths and many preconceived notions that we have. And I'm bursting with questions right now, so I must say at the outset that we may not be able to go through all of the questions in my mind and in the depth that she wishes to in the time, but we shall try our very best. So, Ghazala, the first thing that I think I was thinking of when I read your book is, what was the impetus for you to write this book? And the reason I'm asking it is because it's not what you expect it to be. It's not necessarily a very emotive book. It's on a very emotive topic. But the nature of the book is informative, crisp, data-oriented, and really, really targeted to, I think, dispel a lot of ignorance that at least I know I carried. But Ghazala, tell us.
Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you, everyone who's come here in this heat to listen to this conversation. I'm very grateful to all of you. The subject of the book had been living with me for a while. When I edit a monthly magazine on national security and defense. And in the last 20 years, one subject which has gripped the entire world, or I would say has unified the world against a common enemy, has been terrorism. And I have been writing on terrorism for a while, and while working and researching on terrorism, and as you all know, people keep saying that while all Muslims may not be terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. So this has been rankling me for a while, and I was gripped by the idea that what is it about Islam which moves a certain group of people to inflict damage not only on the others but on their own person as well. So while doing that sort of a research for the magazine, I realized that there was so much misconception or so much which was misunderstood about Islam amongst the Muslims themselves. And that is what the origin of the book was. I thought I needed to tell fellow Muslims, as a Muslim, that you are stupid, you are absolutely brainless, you know nothing about your own religion. But while I set about to do that, I realized that there was a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of probably also lack of interest born of prejudice in understanding Islam on the other side. So I realized that educating Muslims would only be half the job done. I also needed to enhance the scope of the book and address the other side, so to speak. So the long answer to your short question is, I was hoping to build some sort of a bridge of conversation among Hindus and Muslims of India so that they understand each other better, and hopefully with understanding they will fear each other less.
This is a remarkable book. It sort of sits squatly in the, solidly in the middle and gives out information, and in many ways allows you to make up your own mind in an age where it's become practically impossible to do so via media, if I may say so. Now, the first thing, I'm going almost chapter by chapter in your book, so there's a certain chronology to it, as we were saying, aap chronology samjhiye.
Chronology is important.
So starting with modern India, starting with partition. I'm not going to get into the genesis of the faith at this point. You did mention the enormous demographic change that happened with partition, that effectively this entire slice of the upper class, the upper crust, emigrated to Pakistan, Bangladesh, mostly to West Pakistan then, and the impact it had, which we often don't realize. So I'd like you to talk about that a bit.
What happened was during partition, the educated Muslim communities, and education as now, for 70 years ago it was worse, was limited to a certain class and economic strata of the society. So this was the group of people in North India, and I say North India consciously because the migration happened largely in North India. I mean, nothing much happened south of the Deccan Plateau. So they were gripped by insecurity. Now you have to put this insecurity in a little bit of context. See, for so many centuries, they were the ruling class. Starting 11th, 10th century onwards, they had enjoyed the fruits of power. So when 1857 rendered them powerless, because after the British came down very heavily on the Muslims, they were reduced to the status of supplicants. So at that point, and coming from there onto the freedom movement, they realized that their numbers were suddenly very important. And their numbers were far less than the power they used to wield earlier. So this added to their insecurity that in the new dispensation, where numbers will determine, and you know that was a time when this, the separate electorates were being discussed and worked upon. So they realized that in the new dispensation, their numbers will not give them any influence in the country, in the policy making of the country. In any way, they will always be on the margins. So these were the people who then got together to clamor or to demand a separate nation for people like them. So originally, I do not think that what they had in mind was a Muslim nation. What they had in mind was a separate area where Muslims like them could live and thrive. Which is why when this migration happened, the Muslims of North India, those who were economically backward, those who were illiterate, stayed back. Because for them, the idea of nation was their village, their locality, their mohalla, or maximum the district. They had no notion of
the larger nation.
Beyond that. There's a very telling incident about one person who said when the Sir Cyril Ratcliffe had drawn the border of India, dividing India and Pakistan. So he said, will this border run through my village also? And the village was in eastern UP. So that was the idea that if it's a separate nation, is a nation coming to me or do I have to make the effort and go to my separate nation? So this led to a huge intellectual depletion of human capital from North India. So what was left behind were not only the poor class, but also the poor castes of the Muslims, which is why you find that the perception of a Muslim as a backward, impoverished, unsophisticated, uncouth, largely pertains to the northern area, because these are the people who have for generations been deprived of education, of benefits of economic development. So that has been a huge setback. But this is not the case in southern India, where you find really educated, prosperous, and I wouldn't say modern, but forward-looking Muslims.
Because that entire class didn't get, displaced.
Affected, yes.
So to my surprise, I mean, one of the things I always thought was that Islam had, made no differences. And of course, in theory, that is correct. But I understand from your book that there is actually caste that exists within Islam itself, especially within our subcontinent. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, and also how, in a sense, as far as India is concerned, Hindus and Muslims, in that one sense of differentiating between castes, that doesn't really change with religion. That is sort of all pervasive. And we talked about the Shahbano case, and I'd like to bring up that anecdote as well.
See, I think all human societies have a class system, irrespective of what they claim. I'm not talking of caste right now. I'm talking of the social hierarchy. So whichever society it is, even the Western societies, there's always a group of people who give themselves the position of power, so that they are the ruling classes, and the power is constrained in that group. The same was the case with Islam. When Islam came in Arabia, there was a very strong class system. The Ashrafs were the top of the rung, and there were certain tribes in Arabia which were considered, the Quraysh tribe, which was considered better and more superior to the other Arabian tribes. So with this baggage, when it came to India, this class consciousness very easily melded into the caste consciousness which existed in India. So when an upper caste Hindu, a Brahmin or a caste, converted to Islam, they were automatically accepted as the upper caste Muslims. But when a lower caste Hindu converted, a new caste was created among Muslims for the lower castes. So the caste system is among Muslims.
It's sort of ported, it's almost it's just ported.
Just ported, yes. So lateral induction all along the hierarchy. So this is basically a very subcontinental feature, the caste system in Islam. But thankfully, this caste system has not led to untouchability. So you do not find caste violence or untouchability. What it does do is that it reinforces the existing class prejudice. So a person from a poorer or a lower caste will have less access to better housing, better education, better employment, better possibilities of marriage. The prospects for marriage will be limited to within his caste group. So that is how it impacts the caste and the class hierarchy. And because with all these deprivations, generation on generation, whether educational deprivation or social deprivation, so they are also, to a certain extent, intellectually, not to use a very offensive word, I'm struggling what to use instead of inferior, but they're intellectually less advanced than the upper class or upper
There's just exposure, maybe first generation learners, if that. So
yes,
so
absolutely.
Obviously, yeah.
So their intellectual capability hasn't developed to the extent it would develop in a person who is third or fourth generation literate. So that has impacted on their ability to better their lot economically also, the kind of jobs they can get. So all of this has created a very vicious cycle where poor opportunities leads to poor status, and poor status further ensures that opportunities remain limited.
And of course, you mentioned that part of the problem is that the entire narrative in terms of, what the community should focus on is either in the hands of the religious elite or the social elite. The social elite have kind of focused on power in terms of wealth and privileges, and the religious elite have focused on just largely what they believe are priorities. So schools and colleges and hospitals, or in that sense, there's been no one to carry that mantle for the community. And
when you are economically and socially impoverished, you tend to become more insecure. So your insecurity affects your understanding of your own religion. You are uncertain about what you're doing is correct or not, and your dependence on ulama increases. So for everything you need validation. And that has been the bane of a large number of Muslims in India, that they constantly need validation from those who they think know better than them. And this, the impact of this has been that the ulamas have become not only the opinion makers, but also the opinion shapers of the community. And because in Islamic history, the temporal and the spiritual power traditionally vested in one person, the persona of the caliph. So Muslims are used to seeing a religious person also wielding political and social power. So in India, when ulama or a person with some sort of a religious appearance, or who kind of talks by just spouting Quranic verses left, right, center, you automatically start trusting that person more, and you allow that person to occupy the political and the social space of the community as well, which is why people keep saying that, you get the, in Delhi, it's very common that you get the head of Jama Masjid to say which party the Muslims should vote for. Now, he has no authority to do that, but it is assumed that because he is the senior most religious leader, if he says, oh, Muslims, you go and vote for this person, they'll do that. They don't always do that, but this is a perception. And it's a self-feeding perception. The more you believe in this, more people are, they continue to hanker after this.
I think you called it very, very prettily, the industry of the fatwa. So in that sense, I mean, just you were saying that the biggest stakeholders are the muftis, I mean, because that's the whole reason of their being. And so it's kind of, as you said, self-fulfilling prophecy, goes around cycle. And the audience, if it constantly needs that validation, constantly needs that approval, then there will be more and more fatwas being issued. I mean, but to what extent are fatwas, I mean, there was this story that was so strange, it was borderline hilarious, about a Barelvi cleric just declaring some 200 people's marriages null and void because they'd gone to a function which, it got so convoluted at a point that I lost it a little bit. So could you just tell us about that? But that's the whole thing. How can anybody just step in and decide what is null and void in a vast number of people's lives, and why would people accept it? I mean, that's what I'm trying to understand.
I'll just take you a little, I'll just take a step back on this. Islam is supposed to be one final word on religion. I mean, when it came, that was how it was projected. But even the final truth has various versions. So that it was not enough that the Prophet said the following, I mean, whatever he did. People started having people developed their own opinion on what he had said and their own understanding of what was said. So very early on in the history of Islam, various sects crept up. And because eventually it is about how many people are with you, because more people with you ensures that your truth is greater than the other person's truth. So now in India, what has happened is within the Sunni, I mean, everybody is aware of the Sunni-Shia divide, which happened immediately after the death of the Prophet. But within the Sunni also, there are multiple sects now which have crept up in the last 200 years. Now, for these sects, it is extremely important that they claim that they have so many people who are with them. So this fatwa business is very peculiar and something unique to Islam, that a Muslim goes and gets an opinion against a fellow Muslim from a religious cleric. And for the smallest and from the most mundane things like, can I travel by a particular airlines because the owner of this airline also has alcohol business. So they want an opinion on this. I mean, it sounds absolutely ridiculous because it is. So the incident that she's narrating is, there was a person, a very respected person in a village who died. And that person belonged to a sect called Deobandi. Now that person belonged to the sect called Barelvi. His nephew had joined hands with the Deobandi sect. But because he had no descendants, so his nephew did his final rites. And in Muslims, you have a final prayer, namaz-e-janaza. So this nephew conducted the namaz-e-janaza for the uncle. And all the village people, they offered the namaz behind the nephew. Now this particular village had adherence to, they had shown adherence to the Barelvi sect. But they had offered the namaz behind a Deobandi fellow, all Muslims, but different sects. So when the local Barelvi leader got to know of this, he came to the village and he declared a fatwa. He pronounced all the Muslim men who had offered namaz behind a Deobandi Muslim as their marriages were declared null and void, because they had ceased to be Muslims. So if they had ceased to be Muslims, then their wives are Muslims, so the marriages were null and void. And then they said all these men, they have to repent for doing this and then have, enter a separate nikah with their wives.
And there's a repercussion to this, because if your marriage is declared null and void, as I learned from your book, women have to go through a particular thing called halala, which means that they have to then consummate the marriage
that's
with
also
another.
That's also
an Indian feature.
Shortcut.
That's what I've learned.
It's not there. I mean,
So
it's not Islamic law.
It's not part of the Islamic law. So these are the things where one gets kind of lost, and you start thinking how much of this is human construct and how much of this is actually there, and why don't more people contest it? So thank you for kind of bringing it to light, because there's so much I didn't know. But I'm going to come to a slightly harder part of your book, which is difficult for me to read. So I'm wondering how difficult it was for you to write. And this is about it's a chronicling of the riots through the history of our nation, let's say the modern history of our nation. And there are quite a few nerve points it touches. So we're going to try and be as sensitive as we can, obviously, but I don't want to not talk about it. So Ghazala, if you just first tell me, was it hard for you to write this chapter?
Yes, this was the hardest chapter to write, not only because of the violence that it involved, chronicling the riots, how many people were killed, how the killings happened, or what happened in which riot. The difficult part was to reconcile this history with our idea of an inclusive, secular nation. Because I have grown up in a very progressive sort of a family. And I was not exposed to most of this unless something had happened to me. I was not exposed to most of these things while growing up. And whatever may have happened when I was a child, I had forgotten. I've not really paid much attention to it later in my life. So when I was doing this, it was very difficult that if all of this resource is publicly available, I didn't really have to work very hard. If you see, it's one of the most referenced chapter. Everything is recorded. In Government of India's records hold this. If you see National Crime Bureau, they have these records. If you see MHA, Ministry of Home Affairs, they have these records. So the records are available.
Yes, it's a sort of hyper-reference chapter, if I may say so. I mean, that's what I was telling her. And the thing...
so all of this is easily available. So when I was writing it, I was wondering, when it's so easy for me to get this information out, how is it that people still spread rumors? How is it people still believe that all of this has not happened? So that was a very difficult part to reconcile with these two realities.
So, you know, on the one side, there is this sifting of the data and presenting the facts, which, of course, until traditionally until very recently, would have been a journalist's mandate. And as we now know that it isn't current journalism's mandate, so it's sort of left to some of us to sift through books that have gone into this to dispel these myths, because you know, it's the 8-second attention span. That's the age we live in, and these books are therefore necessary. There is, however, this trend of the RSS. I'm going to pick it up by name, kind of building a narrative, sometimes with data, sometimes with hyperbole, but to kind of create a picture that alarms, shall we say. And one of the myths, for instance, that you've busted quite a few, one of the myths you've busted in your book is on temple desecration. And you've done it quite beautifully with data, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about it, because that's the whole point of this book. I mean, you go through all the unasked questions in your mind, and I'm saying this as a liberal. There are unasked questions that you wouldn't dare voice to your friend who happens to be a Muslim. But you have the questions. This book dispels it, and I just think we should all really have a copy. So please,
Thank you so much for constantly rubbing that point in. Now, see, we have to understand the importance of a religious monument, first of all. If you see all the archaeological studies that have happened, even in Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, the sites which were, when they were excavating, the sites which were found to be the grandest were all religious structures. So in any society, whether it's not just India, I mean, you see the whole of Gulf, the grand mosques, huge mosques are built by the rulers, and they are associated, their names are associated with those mosques. I mean, this Abu Dhabi mosque is so famous, named after the ruler there. Same, ditto in Europe, you have these huge cathedrals, huge churches. So the religious monument is always a symbol of power of that particular country, regime, ruler, or whoever. Ditto in India, the temples have always been symbols of religious power, not religious power, political power. Because your political power is vested, your wealth is vested in the temple, your ruler's name, reputation, everything is at stake in the temple. So, desecration of a religious monument is a humiliation of the ruler, that the ruler has been unable to protect what was his symbol of honor. So this has happened in India, though I have quoted a figure of 80 temples, which Richard Eaton has written in his book, that there's evidence, archaeological evidence, that only 80 temples were destroyed by the Muslim rulers over the 7th, 8th centuries. But I'm not going to deliberate on the number, because anything which causes hurt or causes disrespect should be condemned unequivocally, and I will not stick with this that, okay, only 80 were destroyed and not thousands were destroyed. My point is, you have to put these things in context. The time when all of this was happening, we didn't have the rule of law the way we know it today. We didn't have a democratic nation the way we, or the concept of a nation state the way we have it today. Then there's an element of propaganda. Islam disapproves or it bars iconography. It says that idol worship is against the principles of Islam. So the earliest Islamic and the first act of claiming Mecca for Islam was by destroying or cleansing Mecca of the idols which existed inside the Mecca. So this has been part of Islamic history, that you you destroy idols and create a place of worship, place of Allah. So when the Islamic conquerors, invaders, Muslim invaders came to India, this was one of the things which went in their favor. If they were seen as those who destroyed idols, those who created places of sacred spaces devoid of idols. So whether they destroyed them, they did not destroy them, they often claimed that they did destroy it to the Khalifa, because there was Caliphate at that time. So this would add to their brownie points which they accrued with the Khalifa. So for them, they did, a lot of desecration happened, but a lot of desecration was owned by them. If you see Indian history, the medieval Indian history, the majority of chroniclers are all outsiders, and among those outsiders are the Muslim chroniclers. So the Muslim chroniclers write with great pride that my king destroyed 10,000 temples. Now, whether 10,000 temples were destroyed or they were not destroyed, we do not know, because one guy is claiming, and he's claiming because he thinks this will get him praise. So we have to see this part of our history with a lot of understanding of the historical circumstances as they existed then, and not use that as a present day tool to demonize the entire community.
Also, you talked about the restoration of Jagannath Puri being done by Masnabdar under Shah Jahan's rule.
Yes.
And so it may...
Yeah, that's another interesting thing. See, once the Mughals had established their empire, they realized the importance of temples for the local people. And they also realized the importance of the ruler or the emperor with regard to the temple. So Shah Jahan ordered the restoration of Jagannath's temple in Puri. Not only that, he said the yatra would be taken out under the protection of Shah Jahan. So the biggest floats were they carried the name of the emperor. They were carried in the name of the emperor because he was then the protector of Jagannath Puri temple. He had assumed that role. So it's a very complicated history. Even like Aurangzeb, who has, we have unanimously decided that he's a villain. But even during Aurangzeb's tenure, a large number of temples were built. He destroyed a lot of temples for various reasons, mainly political reasons, including the Kashi Vishwanath temple. But he also, even at that point, a lot of temples were built in Banaras, Varanasi during Aurangzeb's reign. So it was not a binary of destruction.
But were they under his mandate, just for my clarification?
Sorry?
The temples that were being built in Varanasi around his reign, were they under his mandate or were they just being built
was
by
the
the people?
emperor. He had control over Banaras.
Yeah. Okay.
So he did not
So
stop the construction.
yeah, he didn't stop
it's
the
a
construction.
he
that's
didn't
that,
stop the
yeah,
construction.
Yeah. There's another very, in common discourse, I often find two sort of contradictory threads coming up. One is the description of, by and large, Muslims being a regressive people. As in, why don't they come into the mainstream, et cetera, et cetera. What we really need is the community to be part of the mainstream. Now, we are beginning to, of course, see that. We are beginning to see Muslim girls come into school, go into college. We are beginning to see a lot of young Muslim professionals. But now, interestingly, there's a second thing of people not being used to that visibility and being threatened by it. So what is acceptable in a Sikh, in a turban, in a young girl's hijab may be a problem. Or, there's another term I use, I come across in certain discourses again, it's getting taken over by Muslims. It's because you see suddenly in a classroom where you used to have one young Muslim pupil, I'm speaking as a teacher, you have probably 6. Which is, a good thing, come to think of it, because that's what we were hoping would happen. And now that it's happening, the visibility is threatening.
Actually, I'll agree with the first part of your question partly, that Muslims are to some extent regressive. And the evidence of that is that all the reforms that have happened in Islam, 12th century onwards, have tried or aimed to take Islam back to the Islam of the 7th century Arabia. So in that sense, they have been regressive. Even in India, when Shah Waliullah in the 18th century tried to reform Islam, his reformation was, okay, he was trying to get rid of a lot of, extraneous practices which had crept in, a lot of superstitions, but along with that, he also wanted Muslims to go back to the Islam of the 7th century. And the ideal state for a Muslim is the Medina, which was Islamic, Yathrib, which was the Islamic capital during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad. So they want to, they have always wanted Islam to go back to that time. So in that sense, yes, it is regressive. I mean, one would associate reforms with going forward, but Islamic reforms have always gone backwards.
And that is a lot of the problem kind of stems from that.
That, absolutely. Now, the issue of Muslims being in the public space, more and more Muslims, the truth is there are a lot more Muslims who are now accessing secular education, especially in North India. And these are the people, this is the next generation after the partition. So the immediate remains of the partition, those poor people, they have managed to get forward, get ahead in life, and now they want to send their kids to better schools, mainstream schools. So you find more and more Muslims in mainstream schools. Now, as more Muslims are accessing schools, there is a threat which the ulemas also feel, and they kind of put this fear in the minds of Muslim parents, that especially with regard to girls, because girls across religions are the repository of family honor. So they tell the parents that, look, if your girl goes out like this, other boys are going to look at her, then what will happen? She'll bring shame. So the only way a parent is allowing the child to go out, a girl child to go out, if she's covered head to toe in a burqa, or she wears a hijab or something like that. So you see more women, more Muslim girls in schools, but you also see a substantive number of them dressed in a particular way. A lot of people are saying, and Muslims are telling me, and I've been trolled on social media for this, and they tell me it's just a matter of choice. A lot of, when women wear hijab, they are exercising their free will.
Which may not always be the case.
No,
but
and I disagree with this. I do not think it is exercising of free will. Maybe out of every 10 girls who are wearing hijab, one would be exercising free will. But in my personal experience, I have not come across a single woman who wears a hijab out of free will. In my own extended family, the family members who wear this have taken to it after marriage.
I think there's this very funny story, an anecdote about one of your cousins trying to eat a golgappa on her first romantic post-marriage date, wearing a full niqab. And, the moment she lifted that veil, that whole pani puri just disintegrated.
Inside the face mask. No, so I don't know Muslim women, and maybe my experience is biased because I don't know too many of them beyond my family. So maybe some are exercising their free will, but a large number of them are not exercising free will. They are using this as a gate pass to leave their homes and enter public spaces, because otherwise their parents will not allow them to do that.
Which is why it is all the more important at this point to just say, let them have their education. I mean,
absolutely.
That's the more important thing.
But now that we are talking on this issue, can I talk a little bit about the hijab controversy?
Yes, please, because I was going to segue into a question about women and your views, because it's so, I think, important to have a Muslim woman, I'm putting a tag on you now, Ghazala, who's a defense journalist, who's talking about this incredibly sensitive issue with such dispassion and so much data. And I just think, please take the stage.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, see, when this whole thing started in Udupi, in Karnataka, 6 girls, they came back to their pre-university college, which in my part of the world is still school. I mean, we have school till class 12th, but in Karnataka, they call it pre-university college, but they were class 11 girls. So they returned to their pre-university PU college after 2 years of pandemic, and they appeared in hijab. The principal said, you cannot enter the classroom in the hijab. The girl said, no, earlier, our predecessors also used to do this before the pandemic. A bit of a fracas ensued. They said, no, you cannot enter. The girls sat outside the classroom in protest. My point is, it was a girls' college. What is a big deal if they took off the hijab and entered the classroom? At age 16 and 17, why would you sit on protest? I mean, if I was that age, I would be so frightened if my principal told me, you can't do this. I'll quietly obey the principal and do what I was told. I can't imagine having the courage to defy the principal for any cause. Because as a school-going person, my biggest concern would be that I have to get through my education, because if I don't do this, I can't go to college. If I am not educated enough, next thing my parents are going to do is just marry me off. So for me, you have to...
You're saying they're not necessarily aware of the stakes involved.
Yeah. So no, so the point is, how do you get this idea that we need to protest unless somebody tells you this is a cause worth protesting? I can't imagine 16, 17 years old girls coming back to college or PU college thinking that we are going to go and protest. And by their own admission, they had not worn the hijab before they came back to the college.
Oh, right.
They said last year we thought our parents had given an undertaking that we will not be allowed to wear hijab, so we did not wear one. But then we realized that there was no such undertaking, so now we want to wear it. So if there was an undertaking, they were willing to take it off. So why make it a big issue? That was my point number one. My other point is, now you see, when politics gets into this, the biggest victims of all-round politicking is always women. Because women are the least powerful in our dispensation across religions. I'm not talking of Muslims alone, even Hindu women. They have the least agency over their lives, over what they want to do. So if you are allowing yourself to be driven by politics on two sides, Hindu politics and Muslim politics, it's a given that you would be reduced to the status of a victim. And this is what happened. And then furthermore, somebody, I don't know who advised them, that you approach the High Court. So a matter which could have been resolved informally, because even in Karnataka, there are a lot of colleges which allow women and women teachers to appear in hijab in the schools and classrooms. Some don't allow. So it was a very informal arrangement. I
just wanted to say,
we
have time for 2 audience questions. I will hustle you to wrap up, because Mala has been known to come on stage and drag people off.
Oh my God.
So I don't want that to happen to either of us.
So I'll just end this here, that going to the court was the worst thing that they could have done. It is a self-inflicted damage, and we will, it's not the end of the matter. The consequences we'll see in the months and years to come.
So I'm going to open up now to the audience. I think there's a gentleman in the front row, and he was first, I'm afraid. So after him, please.
Hello, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to ask a question. There are some fantastic Muslims we know in other parts of the world, and they are come out from all this type of stubborn mentality. I'm just referring the name of Sadiq Khan, who got elected 2nd time, okay, in London, okay. but I have some different observations regarding Islam culture here. First factor is Islam is, I don't know the religion. I'm not saying anything regarding religion, okay? I have no idea. So, which I've seen that Islam is maintaining a virtual culture, virtual practice, Islamic bank, madrasa. These are, it's a kind of intimidation to the existing system of the society. And I find, I'm an entirely non-religious person, I find it is a little bit dangerous. Little bit dangerous for existing culture, existing society, and the modern system.
A little bit threatening.
Threatening, intimidating. So I will ask your perspective regarding this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Ghazala would be delighted to answer your question.
See, madrasas are unnecessarily maligned. Madrasa produces religious teachers. Now, if you have a religious community, if you have 10 Muslims, you will need one ulama. Now, where will they come from? They cannot come from St. Joseph's or St. Patrick's. They have to come from madrasa. So madrasas are fulfilling an objective of producing religious leaders. So you cannot stop the madrasa education at all. There are a lot of poor kids who go there without their will because their parents cannot afford to send them to regular schools because they get free food there. And a lot of madrasas offer lodgings also. So poverty is a factor in this, but religious education is a necessity of any religious community. Just as Hindus, you have people training to be pandits, or people training to be priests, or in Christians, you have, you have nunneries, you have monks. So it's something like that. As far as Islamic banking is concerned, this is a very integral part of the Quran. This is not part of later subsidiary texts, but the Quran forbids acceptance of interest. Usury is forbidden in Islam, so, which is why a Muslim will not accept, will not give money on, what is it called?
Based on interest, so
interest?
Anything.
Yes. So you don't have Muslim money lenders giving money on interest, and they will not accept interest. But now this is something which is limited to the Muslims. This does not impinge upon the larger society. How does a Muslim non-acceptance of interest impact on anybody else? It's impacting on his wealth creation, but it doesn't affect anybody else. So why should that be seen as a threat to a modern society?
Yeah, just a minute. I'm going to have to ask you to take it off the session because there's one more question there. Hi, take your mask off.
Yeah, am I audible? Yeah. So thanks for this very wonderful session. Now, we were having a very frank discussion on the hijab row, and I wanted to ask that the connection between a religious symbol and feminist politics. Because you see, you mentioned that hijab might not always be out of choice because there are religious sanctions attached to any religious symbol, whether it be a ghungat or a hijab. So now when a hijab is banned or any religious symbol is banned in an institution, it becomes a rallying point for that community. No, this is our right and this is what we associate ourselves with. So don't you think that we are actually, inflicting a self-harm in the sense that instead of progressing, we are instead going back. We are saying that this is our right and we are stressing on the fact that this is like what we should be allowed to wear because we are a part of that community. But feminist politics is actually taking a back seat because, you are actually going somewhere. So I wanted to know your views on this.
I agree with you completely. And I have always maintained that one has to choose one's battles very carefully. You see where your priorities are. If your priorities are education, moving forward in life, improving your lot, your family's lot, and ensuring some security for your children, then you would prioritize differently. If your priority is only to sticking to certain dogmas, which in any case are not integral to your faith, then you are the sufferer.
So 2 questions as promised. Thank you very much. Both interesting ones, and if I may say so, 2 very different facets. Ghazala's book is available at the bookstore. Those of you who are veterans of the LitFest, you know where to go. You just exit the gate and turn right where the store is there. She'll be signing copies. It's a magnificent book, as I've said. Please go ahead and buy it. And before we say bye-bye, I want to ask Ghazala for one tip that every average Indian can do in our day-to-day lives to bring communities a little closer to the central space. How do we hold space for you? How do you hold space for us?
You know, I'll quote poet Kafi Azmi here. He it's not a verse, this was a comment he made once. He said that if every Muslim has 5 or 6 Hindu friends, and every Hindu has 2 or 3 Muslim friends, we'll have no communal problems in India, because everybody will know each other, and with understanding and knowledge of each other, the fear will go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You've been a stellar audience. And we'll say goodbye now.
Thank you so much for patiently listening to me. I know I may have waffled at times.
Thank you, Ghazala, and thank you, Josh. As Josh mentioned, her book is available at the bookstore outside, and she'll be happy to sign some copies for you. Continuing our focus on the times we live in, our next session is titled Kabul, Kiev and Us.